social, economical, and even emotional through investment in human capital. We will learn more with our panelists. Let's start with keynote with Honorable Liam, please.
Well, Orpha, thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, it's a great honour to be here just to talk very briefly about the book that's on your table. And I want to start by really just congratulating the Parliamentary Network for taking this leadership position on jobs of the future and jobs for our young people. I serve a constituency called East Birmingham in the United Kingdom. We are the constituency with the highest youth unemployment in the country. And yet around our young people, we have all kinds of opportunities that are opening up, creating good jobs. And so I know that I can't serve the people who send me to Parliament unless we find answers to this agenda. Putting this short book together, it for me that what we really need as politicians is to create a kind of project hope. The first basic lesson is that we need to understand us learning some lessons. The final contribution that we've got in the book is from one of the members of the International Labour Organization Commission on the Future of Work, who finishes the book with an important reflection, which is that in many of our countries, we will have to modernize the social contract if we are to ensure that the future of work offers the promise of inclusive growth. Since the financial crash, the top 1% have done pretty well. They've been growing their wealth at the rate of about 6% a year. That's about twice the rate of everybody else. If that trend persists, by 2030, the top 1% won't own half of global wealth. They will own 2/3 of global wealth. It will be almost impossible to restore any meaningful measure of equality this century unless we ensure the social contract is updated to reflect the different dynamics of capitalism today. So just by way of conclusion, I suppose I'd underline a feeling that many of us has as politicians, which is we no longer live in an era of change. We now live in a change of era. We are now decisively moving into a new industrial revolution. And unless we can create that project hope for automation, then the kind of challenges that we have all experienced from the rise of the extremes, the rise of populism over the last 5 or 6 years will feel like a walk in the park. So this is something where we need, I think, to work together far more closely in the future. We have an awful lot to learn from each other, and we have a lot to lose by trying to fix these problems on our own. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Liam, for all this lesson sharing with our MPs. Now the floor is to Jeremy Lefroy. He's the chair of the Parliamentary Network on the World Bank and the IMF, and I'd like to say a few words that he also founded and runs Equity for Africa, a charitable trust, and self-sustaining by creating jobs through investing in small and medium-sized enterprise.
Thank you, Orpha, and I'm going to be very brief because firstly, Liam has covered an awful lot of stuff. Secondly, most of what I would want to say is in here anyway, and I want us to have time for questions at the end. But the only thing I will say, or two things, at our parliamentary conference in April, Vjosa, who's with us today, invited me to come to Kosovo as a result of the session we did on youth employment. And I went there 3 weeks ago with a colleague, and it was eye-opening and a very, very good visit. So I want to thank Vjosa for that invitation. And it was learning in two ways. One is I think we will be able, as the Parliamentary Network, to assist, perhaps give some ideas to Vjosa and her colleagues about ways to go, but I also learned a few things from what is going on in Kosovo. One thing in particular was that in Kosovo they've set up an online platform whereby voluntary work can be accredited. So if a young person goes out and does some voluntary work in the community and it's with an accredited organization, They can log that on this online platform, gets logged by the organization. And that means that that work is there for a future employer or a future bank, if they're wanting to finance a small business, to see. I think that's a very interesting idea, which perhaps could be adopted by other countries, including my own, because quite often you find that young people are doing an awful lot of this work, but there is no certificate, there is no accreditation, and yet it is very valuable for their future. The second point was I took a group of volunteers to Tanzania in early August, working with young people in schools and on a training course, as well as with small businesses. And it was quite clear to me that it is vital that training for work, preparation for work, starts at a much younger age than it does in most of our countries today, including in my own in the UK. So the whole idea is to ensure that people, even from Standard 6, Standard 7 in primary school, begin to think about business, entrepreneurship, begin to think about the soft skills, the personal skills, the communication skills, in a way that traditional educational curricula do not teach them. And I think that's something that's come out both in this book, it's come out already in the conversations we've had on development of human capital. Olfa, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy. Now I introduce Mr. Mikkel Rutkowski, Senior Director and Head of Global Practice, Social Protection Jobs at the World Bank Group.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Sherif. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear parliamentarians. Let me start by thanking for being invited to this very important annual event or even biannual event. And let me say that I am very much in agreement with what we heard from Liam and on the future of work. I want to congratulate you on having such a formidable production here. I think I agree with all the 10 lessons, as well as in the fact that it is not unreasonable to think that we are moving from the era of change to the change of era, as Liam put it forward. What I would like to do this afternoon is to very briefly present to you main findings of the World Development Report on the changing nature of work, treated as a sneak preview. I think there should be a presentation moving, so I hope you will see it. The moment I see it, I'll be able to move slides. I ask for help in the meantime. The World Development Report will be online and will be officially launched only on Friday, later this week. So take it as a sign of importance of the parliamentary network that I'm here to give you a sneak preview of main messages that are coming. And first and foremost, what I would like to say is, for your information, that this World Development Report was really produced in a very, very open manner, with new versions taking on board comments from various stakeholders appearing every Friday in an updated version. So it was almost a crowdsourced type writing of WDR, and it enjoys more than 350,000 downloads by now, which is a lot for our publications, and will be published later this week. Now, getting to the substance, and please remember, this is a generalized view of the world. So everything I'm going to say, but none in entirety will fit the circumstances of your countries. But let me first talk about the big framing of the report. And I think this big framing is something we can all relate to, which is the big fight, the global fight between automation and innovation. So what you see in this graph is that on the left-hand side, on the y-axis, you have employment, and then on the x-axis you have sectors, both old and new, in the economy. And what we observe is, indeed, as we often read about, as we often see, a lot of jobs being lost to the automation process, and at the same time, a lot of new jobs appearing due to innovation, jobs usually that did not exist before, that are new ones and that are straight results of innovation. So in a way, when we go down to job counting, will there be more jobs or less jobs? This is, in the simplest possible frame, this fight which we are witnessing. What is important, however, is really to realize, even for those of us who believe that what we see now has never been seen before, it is still useful to see to think about what we saw before. And what we saw before, saw a lot of phases of technological progress like that. And the most probably often quoted is the Luddites revolution in the industrial era, where there was a huge fear of the loss of jobs which will not be in any way compensated. And as we all know, it proved not to be true. Not only there were many job losses, but new jobs appeared, and those jobs were jobs of higher productivity, were performed with more ease by people, but required a difficult transition period. Even if we look at something closer to our times, probably if you look at institutions that employ people doing work of assistance, in 5-6 institutions I've worked for last 35 years. I primarily worked for the World Bank, but I also worked for the London School of Economics, for the government of Poland. What I wanted to tell you is that the share of assistants jobs is exactly the same now as it was 30 years ago, except that those assistants do things of much higher productivity and less effort. And there are more examples like that, but I would like you to think in terms of that particular struggle between automation and innovation. This is what the World Development Report puts forward. Now, that obviously creates huge turbulence, and this turbulence could be looked at through many lenses. Here is a look through the skills that are needed in the changing world of work. You have a very simple distinction between non-routine cognitive in orange, routine cognitive in blue, and manual in red. And you would not be surprised, these are data for Europe, because only for Europe they exist to that extent. You see a significant drop of share of workers doing manual work, and an increase in share of cognitive work, both routine and non-routine. And this is a change which, among other things, means that those who do this cognitive work do jobs of higher productivity and less physical effort. However, those who lose jobs because they are not able anymore to do manual jobs enter a period of a difficult transition and difficult adjustment. The importance of non-routine skills, and more broadly soft skills and social-emotional skills, could be proven through many ways. Here, this slide shows to you the recent job advertisements on 3 different types of jobs: genetic counselors in US and Canada, data labelers in China, and apps developers in India. And in addition to obvious skills, which you would expect for all these kinds of jobs, which you usually see in the upper part, like the master's degree in genetics or proficiency in internet use, you also see in each and every of them the emphasis on critical thinking skills, on decision-making, on working effectively as a team member, on analytical communication and interpersonal skills, on willingness to learn, on teamwork. And it is even for data labelers in China, this is what appears in ads, which is a sea change compared to what we saw several years ago. I think the other important element when one looks at the current wave of changes, what makes it the change of era as opposed to era of change, sorry for borrowing from what I heard, but I liked it a lot, is the fact that the previous revolutionary developments had a slower pace in terms of how firms accelerated their growth. Here you can compare IKEA, absolutely a big success worldwide, and you have a certain points marked, for instance, when first IKEA store in 1973 was set up outside Scandinavia. But you see an impressive growth of IKEA, 450 stores in 49 countries. But this growth pales compared to Walmart. And Walmart pales compares to platforms such as Amazon or Taobao that is listed here, which is essentially an Amazon of China. And you see in a very rapid growth and a extremly quick technological advance that influences the growth of the firm. It is useful, and one of the graphs in the World Development Report, which you will see on Friday, compares how those new superstar firms or platforms, it's essentially the same, how they compare to traditional operators in exactly the same segment of the market. And you would see, the medium comparison, depending on what you are more interested in, those who travel a lot may be interested in Airbnb versus Marriott and Hilton together in terms of how many rooms they offer. But then for those who are really interested in banking, who would see a traditional KCB bank vis-a-vis very, very famous M-Pesa in Kenya, and license taxis versus Ubers or Didi Chuxing, there is an enormously quick growth of platforms which dwarf the importance in the same market of traditional operators. What is the lesson from that? The lesson is very important, and World Development Report talks much more about it, and here I will not have time to cover that. But we observe less and less standard, typical employment contracts, long-term contracts, and more short-term work often done through online work platforms. So we have a situation in which we have a very quickly growing freelancer population, still remaining as fast as it is a revolutionary change. Now, why it is important? What is and in developing world or in emerging economies, you see on this graph, it has never been a majority of workers. Basically, more than 60%, 64.7% still operate in informal settings, and countries that had 90% informal sector 40 years ago, like Nepal or India, are more or less in the same neighborhood now. So our long-standing hope that we will have social progress and economic progress through formalization may be actually completely misplaced. It has never been true with the demise of standard employment contract as a basic point of reference in developed countries because of development of superstars and platforms. So I think there is a lot to think about, and the World Development Report concludes that there are three main areas for policy action. The first is investment in human capital and lifelong learning, and I already touched upon that, how important it is to develop new skills related to this quick change, including soft skills, and you will hear more from colleagues of mine later this afternoon on the human capital. The second area is social protection and labor policies. The new systems were created. It needs to disassociate, it needs to focus on individuals who may be in different labor market statuses at different points of lives, and they need to be protected. And all that needs to be financed through new approach to revenue mobilization, which the World Development Report elaborates on. Finally, let me end on the social protection point, maybe with my deep affinity to the topic as a senior director for social protection and jobs. What the World Development Report highlights is essentially what you see in this core, smallest concentric circle, guaranteed social minimum. Too long, we thought of the social protection systems as being really linked to employment and not available if you are in between jobs, if you are in job search, if you operate in an informal sector, or if you are a platform operator. What the World Development Report is highlighting is the need to have the minimum that is independent from the employment status. And what it means in East Birmingham, then it is in Kenya, and then what is in Indonesia. And this minimum in some countries may end up being a universal basic income. It is, however, very unlikely to be a prevailing mode in most of emerging economies, which would have to rely on guaranteed minimum income or minimum packages of different sorts.
People participate and actually spearhead that kind of. But you know, we don't only have to work to adjust to these technological advances, we also have to so we don't have to, just to facilitate it, we also have to make sure we give shorter careers with individual workers in their place or at their place of employment will have to transform into systems that protect the people rather than particular jobs, as jobs will be changing, people will be changing, education seem to matter a lot when we think about those engineers and others who develop use of them. You can do using, hopefully accurate models, that you can the kind of reforms we recommend for labor markets and product market reform, for example, make product more open to new entries of firms.
Yes, thank you. My question is to Ms. Dotkowski. Multi-skilled jobs go into developed countries, since those superstar firms are in developed countries, and having also less skilled jobs created or go into
funding of the social security of the collective bargaining. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Malaysia, please.
Thank you. I would like to give an example of Malaysia, because we realized that the rise of youth unemployment rate in Malaysia was mainly due to the increase in the number of unemployment graduates. And this happened despite the fact that the Malaysian government made. So I would like to ask the speakers
that if we need to if we want to enable our people to participate in higher productivity growth, that we sort of tailor these skills to the needs that corporations and firms have. And there are unmovable curriculum to demand-driven skill improvement, where, for example, employees have a budget that they can spend over a number of years, in areas that are elaborated on and defined in cooperation with businesses. So a lot to learn from other countries, and I think
Portugal, I fully agree. Bargaining, which you said, I think with bargaining is that it is all the time tripartite. If you think about it, you would think of a structure that involves 5 groups: those that are in the tripartite, but also workers in non-standard employment contracts and those who do not have a jobs. And this I read the very valuable comment from Morocco, and again, I also agree very much with the Jordan comment.